Ladies and gentlemen, Xavier, Foley, and Tommy Mesa, winners of the Sphinx competition with an original composition called Cranberry Juice by Xavier Verna. Xavier Foley. Good evening and welcome to SphinxConnect 2017, the epicenter for artists and leaders in diversity and the largest network gathering dedicated to inclusion and excellence in the performing arts. I'm Dworkin, and I'm very honored to welcome everyone to Detroit despite the snowstorm and blizzard and all sorts of things. So great to see so many familiar and new faces here in Detroit. It's especially exciting to do this as we celebrate Sphinx's 2-decade birthday this very week. I want to take a moment to recognize and celebrate several special groups in our midst. And as I do that, I do ask that you please hold your thunderous applause until the very end, if you might. First, the semi-finalists of the Sphinx competition for young Black and Latino string players, our oldest flagship program. These young artists have come from all around the country to compete today. We congratulate them on their stellar performances, and for many of them, this is the beginning of their Sphinx journey. Whether you perform in a finals concert this weekend or we see you next on the stage of Carnegie Hall as part of the Sphinx Virtuosi Tour, your journey has just begun, and we're so proud of your commitment to your art form and excellence. The finals jurors of the Sphinx competition, who worked tirelessly this afternoon and morning to lend their time and expertise in adjudicating this afternoon: Joseph Conyers, Lara St. John, Melissa Kraut, Dimitri Murath, Mary Peckham, Charlotte Lee, and Aaron Dworkin. We thank you for your mentorship and generosity of spirit. Our very own Sphinx Symphony, the professional all-Black and Latino orchestra under the direction of Maestro Tom Wilkins. We will hear your artistry not only on stage during the honors and finals concerts, but also, and excitedly so, from several stages of SphinxConnect all throughout this weekend. The players' committees from SACWA, the first ever Sphinx artist qualifying auditions, who have come from 10 orchestras from across the country, including New World, Memphis, Cincinnati, Houston, Baltimore, Oregon, Pittsburgh Symphonies, Buffalo Philharmonic, and St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, not to leave out our very own Detroit Symphony Homegrown Orchestra. You have heard almost 30 auditions today, helping to transform the career trajectories for these musicians and the future of our American orchestras. In many ways, you've truly made and witnessed history today, and I congratulate you on your commitment. The nearly 500-some fellows, students, and guests who have traveled from all around the world, including France, UK, Canada, Germany, the West and East Coast, and native-born and naturalized second and first generation immigrant and otherwise, we welcome all of you to this week's celebration, a time of learning, engagement, camaraderie, performing, and storytelling. I want to thank those partners without whom SphinxConnect would have been a dream or a hallucination in our minds. So to the Ford and Mellon Foundations, as well as the Community Foundation for Southeastern Michigan, we are so thankful for your visionary support. And finally, to my positively indefatigable and most outstanding team who have sculpted this entire week and all of Sphinx's year-round and summer programming, therefore deserving the loudest of all applause around. That would be Andre, Stephanie, Julie, Lindsay, Teresa, Lauren, Therese, and now a special fermata on Abigail, who has organized this very convening, and finally Xavier Verna, who, having run Sphinx's inaugural convening 5 years ago, along with all of our educational programs, will now be transitioning on to Northern Michigan as he becomes the newest executive director of the historic Ramsdell Theater. Xavier, we love you, we wish you well, and we're also so proud to share with you a moment where we witness history as you're succeeded by one of Sphinx's artist alumni, Stephanie Matthews, our newest Director of Artist Development. Congratulations to all. For those of you who are returning and have been with us before, SphinxConnect is an evolved version of our previous convening where the focus is now on connecting artists and their talents with those who lead the industry and have a genuine and a true interest in inclusion and diversity. The idea of this evolution was born out of countless conversations with partners throughout the country who have been frustrated with the slow progress and challenges in the area of making progress with inclusion. Coupled with our track record in identifying, nurturing, and supporting generations of extraordinary artists of color, it felt like we had to put all of our efforts in establishing a melting pot, a meeting place, an epicenter where the industry would meet its future and together invest in nurturing the greatest talent in our field while networking with many leaders who are already making a difference in this space. I want to stress something. These artists you see and hear in your midst and whom you represent, they're not the first. Sphinx did not discover or invent the lack of diversity in our field. It was there all along, unfortunately. We were fortunate back in 1997 where our founder, Dworkin, from whom you'll hear later tonight, decided he was going to do something about it. So my big hope and vision and wish and dream for our time together this weekend is that we'll be doing something about it. I'll be honest, I don't want to be forming another think tank, steering committee, task force, write any more white papers, or design more evaluation instruments. We know that inclusion is completely feasible, it is necessary, it is specifically achievable, realistic, and time-bound, and the time is now. What we have to do is be individually and explicitly accountable to ourselves, to our communities, and to these artists. Not including the 10,000 young people that we reach via our educational and outreach programming, Sphinx has had an alumni network of now nearly 600. Amongst them are members of Philadelphia, Detroit, Oregon, New World Symphonies, faculty at the University of Michigan, Juilliard School, the first Black Fiddler on Roof, leaders of several successful nonprofit organizations, soloists, chamber artists, small business owners, and entrepreneurs who own their own booking agencies and even produce their own organic popcorn. There have been 20 years. There have been 2 million stories. Let's take a look around the room. We have more than 40 orchestras represented, more than 70 educational institutions, 250 fellows, 10 philanthropic institutions. The best thing about us is that we're all here and we're each a decision maker. We each have the power to decide what and how and when we'll do. We can, we are, and we will make a difference together. We are the people, now's the time, and we're ready. Before I go into introducing our plenary speakers, I'll just ask you for a couple of favors. Favor number one, take out a notepad or maybe one of your fancy apps, Evernote or something like that, and just write down a question. I had a fancy slide, but it's unfortunately not working for me. The question is, why am I here? What is my purpose? The favor number two is related to that. When we close down the party on Saturday night, I'll be asking you if your goal was accomplished and whether you felt that you got what you came for. If the answer is no, I would want to know why and what you would like to have seen or experienced instead. If the answer is partly, I would want to know what the other part would be. And if the answer is yes, I would still love to know exactly what worked so we can do it again and could do it better. Basically, no matter what your answer might be, we want to hear from you. We want to understand and we want to figure out what it is you will personally do once you leave SphinxConnect in this warm environment. Your experience here is going to have much to do with storytelling and listening. Some friends and critics have asked about the value of repeatedly preaching to a choir at conferences. It all feels good because we're talking to people who already are like-minded. We say that one of the goals is actually to make the choir bigger so that everybody can hear the music. You, ladies and gentlemen, are the finest choir there is, so that as you begin your experience, allow me to ask you to do what I do. I've committed to my team earlier this week that I'm gonna make at least 10 new friends. I want you to do the same thing. New friends, meaning not 10 people you haven't seen for 20 years, and now it's nice time to reunion. No, actually meet 10 new people, make friends, and stay in touch with them. And see how much bigger the choir gets, and see what kinds of ideas you reap from that experience and how much we all learn. And secondarily, before I introduce our plenary speakers, think about, I'll paraphrase a quote from one of our favorite organizational gurus, Susan Scott, who talks about fierce conversations, fierce leadership, and fierce accountability. Our work, our relationships, and our lives succeed or fail one conversation at a time. While no single conversation is guaranteed to transform a company, a relationship, or a life, any single conversation can. So speak and listen as if it is the most important conversation you will ever have with an individual. It could be. Participate as if it matters, because it does. So that is my only real hope, that you'll participate in that way, mindfully. And now, with that in mind, it is now time for me to introduce our esteemed headliner for tonight's plenary, who will join us on stage to illuminate the story of Sphinx through the interview with our founder, Dworkin. Dr. Melissa Harris-Perry is the Maya Angelou Presidential Chair at Wake Forest University and the Executive Director of the Pro-Humanitate Institute, as well as the Founder Director of the Anna Julia Cooper Center. She hosted the award-winning television show Melissa Harris-Perry from 2012 to 2016 on weekend mornings on MSNBC. She's also the author of the award-winning Barbershops, Bibles, and BET, Everyday Talk and Black Political Thought, and Sister Citizen, Shame, Stereotypes, and Black Women in America. Dr. Harris-Perry received her BA in English from Wake Forest University and her PhD in political science from Duke. She also studied theology at Union Theological Seminary in New York. Dr. Harris-Perry previously served on the faculty of the University of Chicago, Princeton, and Tulane University. Tonight, she joins us by lending her time and talent as an extraordinary journalist for an interactive interview with the founder of the Sphinx organization, Dworkin. Is now the dean at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. He is President Obama's first appointee to the National Council on the Arts, a 2005 MacArthur Fellow, and a true testament to this man's fortitude. He is my life partner. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a true Detroit welcome to Dr. Melissa Harris-Perry and Dworkin.
I'm a little worried that that our pairing may not be as good as Tommy and Xavier, who preceded us, and so we've got to really kind of up our game.
We're going to have to step it up a lot.
Seems to me that because many of the people who are here are part of the Sphinx family, it is probably true that many people know your story or some important part of the core outline of your story. That said, we return to music that we know over and over again because we believe that we can find something new there. My husband and I have a game that we play. Sometimes he'll just call me and say, "Tell me 3 things that I don't know about you." Just a reminder that we can still discover things. So, tell us 3 parts of your story, 3 things about you that we may not know. Something about this journey. Help us return to the composition that is you, to help us understand why this work matters.
See, I knew I was going to be so nervous coming into this. It was going to be really tough questions. It's interesting because such a significant part of my life is in Sphinx, and so a lot of kind of those experiences that I had that so many of our alums share, being the only one in so many circumstances as you're growing up, and facing challenges from a host of different places. So one thing I'll just share right off the bat, and I think this is because this just came up on Facebook, but for those who might see my feed, there's always Star Trek things in my feed, so I am absolutely obsessed
you're
with
a
Star
Trekkie.
Trek, with all of them, and anyone who thinks the original series is not the original series is best, it's Next Generation. But,
See, this is important already. We are getting to the core of your soul.
yes, and actually, although I absolutely love it, and I am obsessed with sci-fi, and actually have just recently finished my first science fiction novel.
But authoring it, you mean?
Yes, yes. So yes, just wrote it, and so I'm very excited about that, and hopefully you will see it out there
Fantastic.
within about the next 6 months or so. Hopefully it will be out in stores and everything. But a big part of the reason actually that I love Star Trek is because of the impact that it had in terms of issues of inclusion, you know, and the role of Uhuru, and the first lead black female role on television, first interracial kiss, a host of things. Separate from that, I think another key aspect is that I was adopted, and so growing up, my parents were white Jewish, and when I was 10 years old, we moved to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and so I was very ostracized. Big Afro played the violin, last name Dworkin, one black family in the town, and it was rough. And so, but some people know kind of about me being adopted and those types of things, but I ended up having a very deep rift with my parents, and that affected me profoundly in terms of the way that I thought about music and the way that I approach friendships. And to me, those people.
Because your adopted mother was a violinist.
Yes, yes, she is why I play. And when that rift occurred, the people who I chose to spend my life with became this integral part of what I really defined as family. And the way that I often expressed myself to other people, since I really didn't have any friends, was through performing, and was through my music that I could really speak, and I could get people's attention. And so those things just kind of added to the way that role that music played in my life. In the long term, I ended up becoming reunited with my birth parents. I also reconciled with my adoptive family, so things took a great arc over time. But when I was 13, 14 years old and running away and getting kicked out, it wasn't fun, but it redefined friendships and music for me.
As the parent of a 15-year-old, it is nice to be reminded that life is long enough that that eventually the doors will stop slamming.
And we have a 17-year-old, so I've gotten my payback in full due. So.
That's right. I have to keep reminding myself my daughter is the fulfillment of that great parental curse. May you have a child like yourself. Okay. I hope you're listening, dear child. That's right. May you too have a child just like us. So in 2015, you did a wildly insane thing, and you left and became the dean at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. It's like you don't have friends. You said you didn't as a child. It's like you still don't. I'm in administration and higher education, but I'm interested. So now, a couple of years of that under your belt, I'd like to know what about that is wonderful, and what about that is less than wonderful.
Well, first and foremost, what's wonderful about it is our students. And in that way, it's just like it's just like Sphinx. I mean, that's why you get up in the morning, and that's what drives you. And through any of the normal logistics and things like that, that's what, when you see that magic happen with a student, and you see that trajectory that they're on kind of take shape, and that you could play a role in that is priceless. So it's a different environment. from kind of a very entrepreneurial organization.
Yes, universities are not fads. That is correct.
And so it's an interesting dynamic. And so I would say maybe some of those frustrations is that when you have an institution that has such a broad constituency, including a tenured constituency of faculty, and so when Sphinx sees a problem, it can tackle that problem. It can say, can we do something about this? And then it goes about the actions of actually doing it. At a big institution, often, you see a problem, and then you have to begin to gather the various constituencies, because the reality is you can't, in a large institution, just begin to act. Because the nature of the constituencies, through those actions, you can potentially diminish or even damage some of your constituencies, and also you need some of them to get whatever it is done that you want to get done, especially in a sustainable way. And so one of the things that was really important to me coming in was to not just bring about the change that I thought would benefit the institution, especially students, but to look and say, what is the change that I can bring about that will stay and continue to evolve after I transition from the role of dean? And the way to do that at a big institution is you have to take that time to bring those constituencies on board, and you have to take the time to make those arguments and to convince them.
So I know everyone's in the room like, why in the world would you ask like a bizarrely boring question like a question about higher ed administration? I get it. I know everyone's like, what has just happened now? Are they serving coffee next? So let me try to explain. Part of it is I'm just generally interested why anyone would take a job where one is a boss of people you cannot fire, which is what tenured faculty are, right? That's a crazy, insane job to have. So that's what deans are. They're the bosses of people you can't fire.
Yes.
It's hell. But it's also a bit, and I think you've described it beautifully here when you say that you're trying to make change that will stick after you're gone by building some consensus about what is important. So here we are, 20 years into the work of the Sphinx organization. I just want to put a pin for just a moment in this idea of trying to build consensus around things that are important, that will stick. Just want to put a pin in it. We're going to keep coming back to that idea. So let's go to Sphinx for a second. Why in the world is it important to have racial diversity in the performing arts? I mean, I'm a political scientist. I think people kind of get why, and for example, a democracy, it might be important to have elected officials who are racially diverse. Maybe some people might, lots of other people clearly don't get that, but why does #SymphonySoWhite even matter? What difference does it make? It's a violin, it's a bass. Who cares? The race or the gender of who's playing an instrument.
So one of the things I talk about a lot is first of all, the arts and music and classical music isn't just our orchestras, it's so much. But one of the core things is that this is one of the key ways, especially with so much divisiveness going on, that we communicate with one another, that we have the ability to express ourselves, especially to those who differ from us. And if the voices that do and carry out those expressions, and very importantly, are trained and prepared and develop the craft of this medium of the arts, if they only reflect a small sliver of who we are as a country. Our country suffers. Our ability to have civil discourse suffers. I love Chimamanda Adichie, the Nigerian author's quote, and she talks about the danger of a single story. And she says, the danger of a single story is not that it is untrue, but it is incomplete. And the stories of our humanity, the stories of who we are that we weave, are incomplete, profoundly incomplete. Less than 1% of all of the works performed by all 1,200 orchestras in America are by any composer of color. Less than 1%. That fabric of the texture of that would otherwise comprise these stories that orchestras weave about us is a huge loss to our country, and I believe now more than ever, the role that we can all play in the arts is truly profound and absolutely necessary.
The framework that you offer there is, as I often present it to students more colloquially, the definition of feminism that I use, which is to say, rather than suggesting that it is a set of policies or a particular position along an ideological spectrum, that it's simply a question, what truths are missing here, right? So it is just a rephrasing of the idea. It's not that any given story is untrue, but simply that it's incomplete. So it's not that what we have here is untrue, but to ask what other truths are missing. If there are missing truths as a result of missing young people, missing artists in our performing arts, tell me what you think some of those missing truths are. What have these 20 years of Sphinx started to contribute? What are some of the truths? You've told me some of the missing parts of the story, of your story, that we may not have known, the Trekkie parts, and the, a little bit about some of how you're thinking about using position and influence for the purpose of building lasting consensus that goes beyond any kind of personality cult. It is actually building for the purpose of something that goes beyond the individual, actual institutional lasting change. So tell me what Sphinx over 2 decades has started to add to the truths of the arts.
Well, there's, and just as a side note too, I should say that my greatest pride in Sphinx is the last 2 years after I stepped down. The unbelievable work and trajectory that the team under Alpha's leadership has done is just, it is exactly that, the ability to try to create something that can play a role and play a role beyond your involvement in it. And so that is a source of deep respect and admiration for the team and for the entire La Familia, and is unbelievably fulfilling. There's kind of a lot of the logistical aspects, so alums that are now faculty, part of that tenured faculty that can't be fired, populating orchestras, but especially the broad swath that are engaged in a host of different things, and bringing their own leadership about. A large number of Sphinx alums are entrepreneurs and have started ensembles have started organizations, and seeing the ripple effects of those organizations, those entities, those things that just simply didn't exist, and seeing Sphinx alums create them literally out of nothing, and seeing the impact of that in the world, and truly in the world. I think the largest single contingent internationally are in Berlin, and seeing the impact there, just being in Berlin and talking to people who are like, oh, and seeing how they were impacted by Sphinx alums is truly powerful. So I kind of am in a constant state of hearing and seeing this impact. And probably the most, two instances, one a long time ago and one very recently, when some of our Sphinx alums had the opportunity to be at the White House and hearing the former First Lady speak about the importance of what their music means and what all of you do every day. That it's, you know, there's a thing about the setting and there's an aura to that, but separate from that, when the First Lady speaks about that, she's also speaking on behalf of people and constituents that she's talked to. And so for her to reflect the impact of so many Sphinx constituents through that moment, that was powerful. And the other was a number of years ago when I was at a conference in Atlanta, and another Sphinx alum, Patrice, performed for Coretta Scott King. And there were tears in Mrs. King's eyes. And we were speaking afterwards, and she was sharing the role that music played in the movement and in their lives. Her and Martin met at a music school at NEC. And so hearing her talk about that impact and what it meant, that's why we do what we do. And sorry to ramble for just a little bit here, because there's been a lot of talk recently about potential concerns about the arts in our country, and the NEA and these types of things. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about how music education impacts math and other academic performance and like all these achievements and early brain development and function, and it does all of those things. I've seen it firsthand, and the data is absolutely conclusive on that. But I love this recent article that I read, and the person was sharing, no artist, no violinist picks up their violin to make someone be better at math. The auditions that we heard this afternoon, no one was doing that to try and improve academic or improve the economic vitality of a community. They were doing it to move us. They were doing it to express, to take a part of themselves, their humanity, and share that with the jury, and to be able to build a trajectory of their lives where they can get on stage and share who they are in such a deep, intimate way with other people, and transform their lives. And so the arts, the music, classical music, that's why we do it. And if all of us are not able to do it, and if all of America, beyond America, aren't able to experience that humanity that all of us have to offer, I think it makes it so much easier to be divisive. But if you sat in a hall and you've heard a Sphinx alum play, it makes it very difficult to be divisive and to build policies and, walls around your own personal life that don't let people who differ from you in. You are far more prone to want to engage others because of just a profound human experience you've had.
also true that most of those studies are correlational, so it's completely possible that working the equations make you a better cellist. So
Yes.
we just presume that the desirable outcome is to be an engineer, but
Right.
whatever. Tell me about 7 last words.
Wow. So, so this is a very exciting project that has been at Michigan and will be part of the finals concert. And sorry if I'm shaking a little bit. I'm freezing.
It is.
Direct air.
It's like
right. It's like
I feel that we're
freezing.
being punished.
Right. Right.
I mean, I probably deserve it for
Right.
something I've done
Like-
wrong, but we're definitely sitting in some sort of air conditioning situation. I figured like it's some kind of Jeff Sessions, like, it's all right. You don't scare me, Mr. Sessions.
Right.
I'm sit right here.
So if they did this during nominations process,
Yeah,
this
no,
would, no
I
one
don't
would be
care.
able to answer the questions. So
I got you, sir. I went to the 09 inauguration. I've been cold before. Sorry, go ahead, yes. I'm clearly just talking to someone who is not here, so alternative facts. Yes, sir. 7 last words.
7 last words. 7 last words. This was a work written by Joelle, and so it's 7 last words of the unarmed. And so it's a choral work that has been now reimagined with the Sphinx Symphony, with orchestra, and where each movement are the last words spoken by 7 young African American men who were shot and killed. And it's an incredibly powerful work, and it will be performed by the University of Michigan Men's Glee Club under the direction of Eugene Rogers, who's just phenomenal and amazing, and will be recognized by Sphinx later this year. And I think one of the most moving moments for me was one of the movements is about Amadou Diallo. And so we did a documentary at Michigan about this piece, and his mother came. And this, I think, again speaks to why what we do in music is so important. So just the background that his last words, he had called her, and she was in Africa, and the most important thing in their lives and in his life was education. And he was finally going to be able to go to college. And so he was on the phone with her and he said, "Mom, I'm going to college." And those are the words that are in the piece, that's it. And after the documentary, she was talking about how with all of the demonstrations, all of the protests on the streets, she said this piece does more to capture and celebrate his life and does more than any of the protests, than any of the demonstrations. That's the power of what we do. And we have to train it. We have to develop it. It doesn't just happen. I don't know, you can't just pick up an instrument and play. You can't just pick up a pen or computer and create music, out of thin air. There is a craft that needs to be developed and needs to be developed to a level of excellence. And that is what's personified, I think, amongst the Sphinx alums.
I was living in New Orleans for most of the decade, immediately following Hurricane Katrina. And my husband and I talk regularly about the fact that one of the first things that was eliminated in the public schools there were the the music education programs. And that for all of the failings that those schools had, what they had were performing arts musical programs that people were very proud of and connected to. And I kept thinking, well, yeah, of course, you had to take music out because that's where the revolution would occur. And I don't even mean that lightly, that I am a failed performing artist. I'm a tone-deaf cellist. It's really quite a pathetic thing to have to listen to. I did earn my parents lots of chips in heaven from having to listen to me practice as an adolescent. But there is something about discovering that you can make a thing that is still and silent suddenly not be still, and suddenly not be silent. That you can just take a blank piece of paper and turn it into art. That you can take a piece of wood and turn it into music. It's literally the capacity to create. And as soon as you know that, even if you are only ever going to listen to music and never play it in front of someone, you are absolutely a dangerous human after that. You told me a lot about what Sphinx alums are doing in the world. How many of them are dangerous to injustice? Or are they collectively dangerous to injustice?
Oh, incredibly. And I was kind of just contemplating whether to just say all of them are a danger to injustice, because I've seen it in so many different ways, or in so many different manifestations of what they do. I think one of the things that comes out of, Sphinx and certain aspects tend to be pretty rigorous. And as a result, Sphinx alums are courageous. And it's one of the words actually that I really, really love, and I love the whole definition of courage, which is that it's not the absence of fear, but it's action taken in the face of fear. And to go through certain aspects of Sphinx, it requires action in the face of fear. And when I look at so many of our alums, they're living their lives in that way. And some just very deliberately and are writing, performing, leading in ways that are directly in opposition to injustices that they see. And then others are doing it by proving models wrong about how you can build a sustainable life and how you can build a life comprised of these different parts of teaching or performing or leading or being an entrepreneur, and impacting communities and engaging communities. And I continue to just be inspired by it every day.
So now I want to put the pieces together, because I'm genuinely distressed about where we are as a country at the moment. And I want to be clear, I'm not distressed because the political party that I tend to vote for lost in a presidential election. I expect that to happen about half the time. In fact, I would not think we were in a healthy democracy if it didn't happen about half the time. I sometimes think that I live in parts of the country that aren't healthy because it doesn't happen about half the time. I'm distressed because we seem to be an ungovernable people, and I don't mean in a good way. I mean, sometimes you should be ungovernable because the people governing you should not have the right to govern. But because I'm having trouble, and I'm an eternal optimist, seeing how on either side we get out of this. Get out of obstruction on both sides, get out of seeing one another as mortal enemies, as doing the thing that I heard you say on a kind of smallish scale you're trying to do. Build consensus for meaningful change that lasts beyond your own tenure, lifetime, that will include more people in a big story that you're trying to write, that will be more just and more fair than it is today, recognizing that, you know, arc of the universe, all that good stuff. It's a bit of a symphony you're trying to put together here. And I'm wondering how we might take some lessons in dissent, improvisation, classics, some lessons in practice, hard work, failure, learning from it, picking ourselves up, identifying talent. What have you learned over these past 20 years? And should we just maybe be standing on the steps of Congress every day with a violin? And I'm almost not kidding about that. I was stunned at how quiet, I was at the inauguration, was stunned at how quiet it was. I kept thinking about Air and Simple Things and Yo-Yo Ma at the 2009 inauguration, and then the reading of the poem by Lizzie, and I just thought, it's so quiet this time, and all the artists who didn't play, and I thought, I get it, I get why you didn't play, but I also wonder, as you point out, that if you're standing there and you're playing, does it mean then you have to acknowledge, I don't know, should we be playing? What do you think? I don't know, these are I'm actually asking.
Yeah, so it is, the questions I find myself asking and or needing to answer today, I never could have predicted 20 years ago. But I also never could have predicted that Sphinx would, evolve into what it has. So I raise that to say that I also tend to be an eternal optimist. And, but not only that, and I did this in this little kind of weekly video blog that I do, but I kind of use this term optorealist, but in other words, that my optimism is fueled by an active participation. In other words, that I believe you have to be actively engaged in your own optimism. Otherwise, pessimistic outcomes will probably occur. I think that there are difficult decisions about, for example, whether to have played. Because the idea or the sense that doing that makes you participatory in something that's taking place that you might find fundamentally oppositional to your beliefs or your outlook on life. But I guess what I would say is that I wouldn't necessarily fault people for playing if that was their purpose. But if you don't play, then I would say you need to find somewhere else to play. In other words, and this occurred the day after the election. I didn't make it out of the parking lot before several students were sobbing on my shoulder, and one of them was crying, saying, "How can you possibly have the school open today? The school should be closed, the university should be closed," all this. And I actually came back at them pretty hard, and I said, "That is ridiculous.
We had to keep it
And I
going.
said, you know, and I was like, you should be practicing. The best thing you can do is
Yes,
practice.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm like, that's why you're here. And if, from your perspective, viewpoint of kind of everything is cascading, I'm like, then you've become the active participant and supporter of the worst outcomes that you think are being done to you. No one has to do it to you. You're doing it yourself. One of the other...
I mean, did you ask them what they did the day after Trayvon was killed? What they do the day after Michael Brown was shot? What they do? I mean...
Yep. And I love one of Brother Ali's lines, you know, where he talks about, and to this point where now we no longer need chains to be slaves, that there is a point where if you let the sense of oppression, the sense of frustration, the sense that things are just so terrible to make you stop yourself, that's the...
Wake up and practice.
That's the ultimate worst thing. So I would say if you're not going to play, then find something to do. Find some way that you're participating. And whenever I hear people complaining, that's the first thing I always say was, well, what are you doing? What are you doing about that? And if you aren't doing anything about it, then I tend to disregard and discount their complaints because they're just not well-founded. You know, another rap artist calls them, coffee shop revolutionaries. You know, who sit around in a Starbucks and, man, this is terrible, and oh my gosh, and so on and so forth, and talk about all the things that should be done, and then just go about regular life. And so there are so many things and ways in which you can be active and do different things. And from my perspective, the best way is to be successful at whatever it is that is your goal in life. And so that's why practice, learn, obviously education, the core thing. Because with that training, with education, you can absolutely do anything. You know, when I was 24, I was a college dropout and destitute and was not practicing regularly. But you can make choices, and it's those choices you make. For some of the semifinalists, right now is one of those moments, because the reality is that the majority of young people who just participated in the Sphinx competition didn't advance. Yet they constitute the vast majority of all of Sphinx constituents and Sphinx alums from the competition, and the things that that semifinalists have done is extraordinary. And what they choose to do this evening, tonight, that's what defines their lives. That's what defines our lives. And to me, that's what I find so exciting. And I find kind of the pivotal moments in our lives. And for me, it's how I faced those moments that enabled a whole lot of luck to occur, which is when preparation meets opportunity.
So we are going to open up our conversation to folks who are in the audience. There are 2 mics. There's one in each of our 2 aisles. So feel free to come to the mics, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself, to say who you are, and then to respond with a question to either of us or to both. And as you're coming to the mics in the aisles to ask a question, I'll just build on what you were saying about the question of loss or of defeat. I, as a political scientist, often remind my students that the speech that President Obama gave as Senator Obama that became definitive of his campaign in 2008, Yes, We Can, was a speech given in defeat. And students often, especially young students, because they were like zygotes when this happened. Now, it's so easy to get old, just fast. But that Yes We Can was given in New Hampshire after he lost. And that no one really remembers what in the world he said in Iowa when he won. Who really cares what he said in Iowa? Something like, I won, yeah. And we're like, okay, whatever. No one remembers that speech, but it's that he showed up that night in New Hampshire having lost and said, oh yeah, by the way, yes we can. And it was like, oh God, yes we can. And that was it. And the whole notion of everything right thereafter was actually the speech given in defeat, right? So it's really what you do in that moment.
Totally. Which, as a another little side note about Star Trek, is that...
And scene. Yes. Give it
you
to
can
us.
see there is an obsession here.
I love it.
But no, is that Obama owes his presidency to Star Trek. So I am, of course, being slightly silly.
No, I love this. Keep going.
But he was, of course, in a very hard-fought battle for his Senate seat originally with Senator Ryan. And
right, who took his wife to a sex club. Was it a...
No,
that is what happened. Was it a Star Trek sex club?
So, no. So I was just going to refer to this as a scandal.
Fascinated.
So the reason why there was such a scandal was because Senator Ryan's wife was a celebrity, and the reason she's a celebrity is because she is the famous character, 7 of 9 on Star Trek. And if not for her celebrity, I think the scandal might not have been
so big.
Such an issue.
Oh, yeah, right, okay.
I've got a few
Man,
other...
I was like, where are we going?
I've got a few other reasons why Star Trek is amazing, by the way, so I'm just going to...
one must point out that taking one's wife to a sex club, one's wife, not one's intern, not one's babysitter, one's wife, who then was like, I don't like this, and then divorced one, would hardly count as a scandal these days.
Except for Star Trek.
No, period. Just full stop. I'm just saying, these days, Mr. Obama would still have an actual Senate race on his hands.
Yeah.
Back in, 2004, that was the end of Mr. Ryan, and then, it was a cakewalk. So I'm just saying, time, it does change things.
Oh, yes. This
All
is
right.
very true.
We're off the rails now. Yes, ma'am, save us.
I just had to share, Aaron, with you, to share things we don't know about each other.
Yes. Here we go. Oh, it's getting good now.
Yes. I was maid of honor in Jerry Ryan and Jack Ryan.
Stop!
No!
It is getting so good now!
Oh, my God.
Yes, ma'am! Who else has something good? What do we have now? Yes.
That is...
And were you also in a Star Trek episode? No? No, it's getting good.
Oh,
yes,
my
I love
gosh.
it.
That is...
I forgot we're in the Midwest.
Utterly unpredictable.
I forgot we were here in Detroit. Yeah.
So
Usually when I tell these stories, no one has any memory of them. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
No, we should.
No.
We should.
Okay. Are you getting us back on track, ma'am? Yes. Great. Lovely. Great.
I just have one quick question. What advice
First tell us who you are.
I'm Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
I was just wondering, what advice would you give to young musicians that are, kind of getting out of the young artist phase, more into the professional and even college life?
And just in terms of kind of at that point of looking at how to build your career. So my first thought is that you should think about what it is you want to do, regardless of what will make a sustainable career. So in other words, to first think about what would be ideal? What I would always, kind of ask myself is, if I won the lottery tomorrow, what would I actually do with my time? So think about what it is that you actually would want to do. And of course, with your music, how would you want to engage with your music? And would you want to be a performer? Would you want to be a teacher? Would you want to be an entrepreneur? Would you want to be an audience member or a patron, or, kind of what would be your ideal life. And then from there, say, okay, well, now that that's the ideal, how do I build towards that? And bring that down to the various steps. And that's also one of the other things I would say, is that when you look at, something like that, it may seem just monumental. How could that just possibly happen? But if you break it down into the various pieces, then you can find that certain things are very achievable. There was, when I was in high school, I hadn't played the chaconne yet, and so we were joking, and I was talking about how you can learn any piece in a week and be able to perform it. And so my friends were like, well, yeah, but you're not going to be able to learn the chaconne and play it within a week. And so I did, not well, but I did. And but the way that I did was, then I broke it down, and I literally, just took it piece by piece, so that you have, a certain literally number of measures that you're gonna, learn and memorize, every hour. And you do that, and you're like, okay, if I do that, and I do that for 4 hours, and I do that over 7 days, then all of a sudden you've got, your goal accomplished. And from my perspective, you can take that approach with anything in life, and you can take the most grandest, literally, dreams, and you can actually go about a process to make them come true. And I would say never limit yourself and say, well, I should maybe do this, it's more feasible, it's more realistic, those types of things. I would start with your dream and try to make that happen. And along the way, it may or may not happen, but along the way, and just the journey towards your dream is, from my perspective, a far better journey than a journey to a minor goal that is safer.
And you're transitioning to college? Or out of college?
And out of college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it goes without saying that, at least from my perspective, unless, you win the lottery or any of those things, whatever it is that you're doing, you have to be the best at it, and the only way you can be the best at it is to work incredibly hard and make the most. When I first started in college, I started at Penn State, and then I had 4 years off. And when I was at Penn State initially, which I went to straight from Interlochen, I wasn't making the most of my time at college. But after 4 years and living very difficult life circumstances, when I went back to Michigan, I was soaking up every last ounce of what the incredible university had to offer. And so I would just say, whatever institution that you're in and whatever surroundings you have, soak up every ounce of support, of resources, of learning, of facility you can build in yourself, because then you have an arsenal to take with you to try and achieve your dreams.
And just like general college advice, not so much artist advice. It's just from the work that I'm often doing with my students is, but maybe I do often see this with particularly talented students, is if you've been very good, extraordinarily good, twice as good, you will often think that you have to do it alone. And there is not only no shame, but it is, in fact, impossible to navigate young adulthood and adulthood on your own. And anyone you see who is making it even a little bit didn't even do it slightly by themselves. And even if it looks like they're doing it by themselves, they're just not. And it's just not possible. So, you must ask for help. And some of the people who are gonna be your cohort and your people are gonna look just like you. And they're gonna be other brown girls and black girls, and that's gonna be great, and you're gonna need them. And some of them are not gonna look like you at all, and they're gonna be very surprising people who will show up in your life. So I can remember For example, in graduate school, like, my advisor turning out to be an older white guy who does statistics, who just happened to find some talent in me and ended up being, for 2 decades, an extraordinary supporter of my work. On the other hand, like, I also have like my squad of like Black girls who sometimes I just need to go and just be with them, right? So it's just to say, I do sometimes see my very best, very brightest, most extraordinary students just out there drowning because they are so determined to do it by themselves, because they believe that that is the only way to prove that they are great. But like, you are already great, and every truly great person has like 400 people just all around them. And so just no shame, absolutely necessary to ask for lots and lots of help. Not just to ask for it, but sometimes to demand it. So I do not believe in self-care. I think self-care is just some crap. Other people should care for you. And so you should care for them when they need it, and they should care for, so y'all need like crew care, squad care, us care, right? And like, because if you can just care for yourself, then why would you need some other people? You know who don't do self-care? Like, boys. That self-care stuff is like, you notice that's only girls. Care for yourself? No. How about you care for me? And then later, when I feel better, I will care for you. How about that? Okay, so get help, yes.
I could not agree with that more. And on top of mentors, as part of those caring, I would not be on the stage. My life trajectory would be utterly different without my mentors. And with my key mentors, not a single one of them offered to be my mentor.
That's right. Yes.
I went after them, and I knocked on the door. I called.
Bothered them.
I bothered them to the end. And that's part of the reason why they chose to be mentors, is because, usually mentors tend to be very busy people. And so the biggest thing they value is their time. And so they don't want to invest time in a young person where whatever they have to offer will be squandered. And so when you're showing and demonstrating to them, look, whatever you are going to help and provide me with, I'm going to make the most of it. You will be so proud of me. Bang, 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 bang. Knocking on their doors and doing that. And without mentors, there would not be a Sphinx organization. I guarantee you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
How do I make people remember my name whenever I perform?
Oh, I don't think that's going to be a problem. But first, tell us your name.
My name's Maxwell Fairman.
Well, Maxwell, I would probably start out each performance by sharing your name and letting everyone in the audience know that there's going to be a quiz at the end of your performance. And you expect them to get 100%, and there's only one question. And then, at the end of your performance, ask them to tell you what your name is.
Maxwell,
One small item.
what's your instrument?
I play violin.
Where do you live? Where are you from?
Cincinnati.
Hey, all right.
And what grade are you in?
7th grade.
7th grade, Maxwell from Cincinnati. And you play the violin.
So can I ask you a question, though? Why is it so important that people remember your name?
So then they can invite me to perform somewhere else.
I don't think Maxwell needs a mentor.
You are on top of it.
He really just needs a a card and
Right.
a website.
Exactly.
He's good.
That's exactly what I was going to
He's
say.
fine.
Yeah. Some business cards, website, practice, and you're good to go.
Yes, sir.
Hello,
Yes,
my name
ma'am.
is Dana Wilson, and I am from Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan.
Yes.
And first of all, I'd like to just acknowledge that I appreciate the Sphinx organization. And coming from Atlanta, I also really appreciate the talent development program,
Yeah.
which has fostered minorities as well in music.
Yeah.
But lately, I've been receiving comments saying that I'm receiving a handout because I'm Black, that I have it easier, I have advantages over an Asian person or a white person. How do I face those kind of comments? What encouragement would you give? And being in situations where I'm accepted to camps just because I am Black, should I be angry about that? Should I appreciate that? Just want to know your advice on that.
So when I was 13, my dad, my adoptive white dad, said to me, when you walk into a room, people are going to make assumptions about you. But if you're the best at what you do, that is your most powerful weapon to mitigate that nonsense. What you're describing about what other people might say is nonsense. And so first, I would just share that the most powerful weapon or arsenal you have is the excellence you bring to whatever it is that you do. And those arguments tend to fall, literally, on deaf ears. They no longer hold substance if you bring excellence. So I would just kind of share that because I think that that's an important part. But also, there are a host of things in life that bring various advantages and disadvantages. When you look at certain just data sets from around the world, so there's a huge advantage, being born in certain countries. There's advantages in being born in certain circumstances, or these types of things, or going to certain schools, or any types of things. Wealthy parents who make donations, and so now you're a legacy, or your parents are alums, you're a legacy student. There's all kinds of factors that go into not just admissions to colleges or universities, but to a whole variety of life circumstances. And my perspective on that is to actually go back to the earlier thing of what is it you want to be able to do in life, and have that be your goal, whatever it is, living out that dream. And as you go along the way, there may be certain circumstances where you have advantages or disadvantages. Bring your A game. Build your A game and then bring it. And when you kind of hear the strains of discontent around you, which will potentially grow the more successful you are. So the more successful you are, the more you will unfortunately potentially hear that nonsense. I tend to not take time with it unless the person voicing it is someone whose opinion I value. And usually that doesn't come from people whose opinions I value.
Can you tell me your name one more time? Because I was still remembering Maxwell's.
My name is Dana Wilson.
Dana. I have a sister named Dana. And what year in school are you?
I'm a sophomore in college.
You're a sophomore. So I want to respond as well just to a couple of things that I heard you say. So you asked, should you be mad? If you are mad, that is okay. If you are feeling hurt by those feelings, by those comments, that is also okay. So I want to acknowledge that when people say harmful and racist and sexist and brutal things to us, that we are human, and we will experience as human beings real emotions as a result of those things, no matter what we may know in our minds to be true. It doesn't change what it feels like to have your accomplishments and work diminished. And that will always be true. So, particularly if you are a person for whom you don't have a thick skin, just as if that's just sort of who you are, if you take things in, then you may always take those things in. And you may be able to go and talk yourself out of it cognitively later, but it doesn't mean you won't feel it. And it doesn't make you a bad person or a weak person to feel it, and trying not to feel it, trying to repress it or push it away can sometimes make it worse. And I just say that as a person who's now getting older and older and having a thin skin. I had to build for myself a set of walls around social media, for example, because I spent many years on television being attacked every time I would say, "Good morning, it's Saturday." People would be like, "Sphinx died, just died," and you're like, whoa. Hey, but it is Saturday. No, for real though, actually. And I have colleagues for whom it actually doesn't bother them, and they could actually do their show live with their social media streaming. And I actually didn't read @reply. I still don't. It's been 5 years, and I haven't read an @reply on Twitter in 5 years, because for me, I actually don't want to take it in, right? So it's to say, if taking in the negativity harms you, it is okay to acknowledge that it does. The second thing I'll say is, I know from, especially in Black communities, we love to tell you. We want to tell you, and we want it to be true, that your excellence will silence their racism. But we just watched 8 years of a president being excellent, and it did not silence either their racism towards that president or racism in general. And so I wish that Black excellence would make racism go away, but it might not. It will silence some racism and not others, because racism is systemic, and it is doing work for its own purposes that may not have anything to do with you at all. And I just want to say that because you may, in fact, be Michelle Obama excellent, and they still may say the things about you that they said about our First Lady. And I say that more about her even than about the president, because, the president makes like all kinds of policies that people agree with and disagree with. It's hard to understand why people would have feelings like that about the First Lady. I want you to be excellent because you love your craft, because you're, not for them, because they may be doing whatever they're doing in the world. So I want you to be able to feel mad if you feel mad, you to be able to feel hurt if you feel hurt. I want you to be excellent for yourself. And I also want you to know that if you get a few ill-gotten gains, and I don't think you even have one, but if you do, what the hell, sometimes you get an ice cream cone. So, whatever.
Hi, my name is Rashida Coleman. I'm from DC.
Yes,
my
Rashida.
question, woohoo! My question is, from the idea of Sphinx to its conception, how long was that process? And what advice would you have for someone that would like to start a program from the scratch, from bottom up?
So, very short answer to the last part of your question is, if someone wants to start a program or an initiative, my very first response is, do it. The most, one of my favorite quotes, I think it's Adlai Stevenson who said, "There's nothing more common than unrealized talent." And so there is nothing more common than I hear from young people are ideas that they don't even try. So just to try to do it. I had 7 projects that I tried to launch before Sphinx that, if you will, failed in that they weren't long-term sustainable. but every one of them brought about experience, knowledge, education, wisdom, contacts, network, without which Sphinx never would have been possible. In terms of Sphinx, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint a specific date, so time frame for this reason, that when I had the idea, I immediately started working on it. So there was no delay. Literally the next day, I started doing various things and laying out, saying, what would be needed for a competition, and how we do it, and what would it be called, and so on and so forth, and what would be the age, and so on. And who should I talk to, and should there be a board, and all of these things. So for me, there was no delay from idea to, if you will, kind of project. In terms of kind of in a functional way, the organization, I founded the organization in that I became a 501c3 within about 6 months or so from just the initial idea. And so that means organization formed, board of directors, incorporation papers, the whole 9 yards, a lot of logistics. And all of which I just did myself, a lot of which I had learned, some of which I had learned by rote from other, if you will, failed initiatives or projects, but I learned from them. And others I was just doing it for the very first time. Then from the organization actually coming into existence to the first competition was another year and a half. So the Sphinx organization actually came into existence in the summer of 1996. And then the first competition was in 98.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Adriana, and I'm from Michigan. My question is, how would you suggest to the young Black community how to cope with the side of racial injustice or experiencing it? Like, for example, after the election, me and my mom didn't go to work, or I didn't go to school. We didn't feel like getting out of bed or anything. So.
Yeah.
And she's working, yeah. So, did you share your name?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You want to start on that? You want both of us on that? So I think a lot of people experienced that after this election, and I thought it was interesting that both of us had like, what? Go work. We must be cut from the same cloth in many ways on that. I suspect that's in part because, for me, one, I did not have a soft father. I have a loving father, but he is not soft. He is hard, like sandpaper, rough. He grew up in the Jim Crow South. So he grew up in a time of segregation, and in a period that I think impacted him and impacted the way that he raised, I'm the youngest of 5 children, impacted, I think, the lessons that he imparted to us, which I mean, I was only half teasing when I said, well, ask people what they did the day after, the Zimmerman verdict, or after the Ferguson decision. For me, and I think for many people, the 2016 election was difficult, but was part of a long set of historical inequities, injustices, concerns about the position of people with less power. That we have fought and struggled around before. So I'll tell you a quick story that my dad was part of how my dad raised us that hopefully will be part of an answer. From the time that we were very small, all of us, 4 girls, 1 boy, you would get for your birthday, still get for your birthday, a birthday card. And in the birthday card is the number of dollars of the age that you are. So when you're 5, you get $5, which is great. $5. When you're 40, you get $40. Yeah. Okay. And the card is always signed, not Love Daddy. I mean, he'll say, I love you, but the card isn't signed Love Daddy. The card is signed, The Struggle Continues, Daddy. Including when you are 5 years old. $5, The Struggle Continues, Daddy. So you can barely read. The struggle continues. Now, so when you're 5, you're like, I don't know what is happening, right? I mean, you're happy about the $5, but you don't know what the struggle continues means. But having that reinforced is a reminder. And it's a reminder that now that I am in my 40s, I consider to be one of the greatest gifts that my father ever gave me, which is just this. You are not promised to live during the part of history when we are winning. There is nothing about who you are that is more special, more extraordinary, cuter, better hair, better Patagonia. I mean, I like your Patagonia, it's revolutionary. Right? None of that, though. Than your grandmother, than your great-grandmother, than your great-great-grandmother, who lived in Jim Crow, who lived in slavery, who, for my father's great-great-grandmother, who was sold on a street corner in Churchill in Richmond, just a few miles from where she was brought off of a slave ship. I am not inherently cuter or better or more special or smarter than she was. Just happened to be born during a different moment. But she struggled and then passed on a baton, and then there was a different kind of struggle and then a different one. But at each point, you're not promised a victory, you're just promised to get to be part of a continuing struggle. You have a responsibility to just take up your part, to do your most excellent best, to stay in the practice, to keep doing the work, to grab up everybody around you, to build some shelters for other folks, to make sure you're staying in dialogue, to not think that you have all the answers, to ask some good questions, to keep doing the work. But, you know, the struggle continues. Here's $10, keep it going. And so when we have the setbacks, it can feel like, oh my God, I can't get out of bed. But like, you weren't promised that you were gonna get to win all the time. Hell, you got to live during a pretty good part. You got the whole 8 years of like, Obama, Obama, So you get to live for a little Trump. Okay, I'm gonna take that. Okay. Whoa, that was rough. Hey, I wasn't expecting that one. Oh, really, Jeff Sessions? Okay. Go. All right, sir, that's a lot, but here we go. Struggle continues, and next. Oh, I wasn't expecting that one, right? That's all.
So, I will only add, Adriana, that to add on to what Melissa said, just the last word, which is next, of just thinking about what's next, and have that be your focal point, and thinking about what you can bring to that. The reality is, related to Sphinx stuff, that I could have just been, concertmaster of the Harrisburg Youth Symphony and the orchestra. I was the only African American, and so the orchestra wouldn't be quiet for me to tune the orchestra, right? And things like that, right? Or the kids, I go to school and I had a big afro, so they would go, oh, give Dworkin the afro clutch, and they go like this and then grab afro. So like going through any of these things, and then you can choose to merely be a recipient of kind of the nonsense, as I mentioned, or you can choose to think about what's next. And it's funny, and I'll share this. It wasn't so funny at the time, but years later, right? People reach out and like, oh, on Facebook, oh, it's over. So I had friends, acquaintances who connected on Facebook from when I lived in Hershey. Friends who, from my recollection, traumatized me. Like, they weren't friends, and they're like, what's up, and da-da-da-da, and so on and so forth.
Heard you on that with
For that, right, yeah, exactly, yeah. So a whole bunch reached out after MacArthur. But their experience as a child was not one of causing me distress. It was just kind of what they did with other kids, and it was part of being cool for them, right? So part of being cool at that point was to make fun of the kids who were being made fun of. And so it wasn't this kind of intentional thing. And so I could have just taken that and just had that become kind of this fixated focus of my life, this terrible thing, as opposed to kind of, but what's next? And what can I do to be an active participant in creating what's next for me?
I feel like that's so cute. For you to be able to have that level of empathy about, no, seriously, to be able to remember that those, to see your childhood tormentors as also children at that moment.
Absolutely.
And to have some empathy for that experience. That reminder, as Dr. Angelou would say, that I am human, quoting Terrence, I am human and therefore nothing human can be alien to me. That we are ultimately capable of the most extraordinary things that human beings do, but also the most appalling things that human beings do. And so the best we have is our intentions. And so we have to cultivate our right intentions, because we're not completely free of also having done harm in our lives, also having hurt other people out there in the Facebook world, or people that we also probably unintentionally harmed. And so to be open to the idea that not every person was purposely making your childhood hell, I think, is also, it is part of letting go. It's courageous, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of these great, and I think it's wrapped up in a quote somewhere, but this just idea that you ultimately you can't control everything that happens to you, but you have 100% control how you respond and how you react to the things that happen to you. And that is what defines your life.
Thank you.
And I'd also say, because we're getting the time back there, yes, the other thing that we truly have that power to control is the stories that we tell. The stories that we tell about what happened to us, about what we want to happen. And I think the stories that we tell help to shape who we are and the world that we're building. And you have begun to tell an extraordinary story here through Sphinx, and I have really enjoyed. I've been having a great time up here. Beginning with your story, beginning with the story of this organization, and the story that you all are collectively building. I am an audience member. I am enjoying listening. I'm enjoying being part of it. And thank you for letting me hang out and be part of the story for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.